imagine this, and it's the year 1841 in Hartford. The church bells are ringing, the bride walks down the aisle, and everyone is smiling. But by the end of that same day, she would be fighting for her life. The person responsible? Not a stranger, not an enemy, but her very own mother-in-law. If this story shocked you as much as it shocked me, don't just keep it to yourself. Hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss more unbelievable true stories like this. And tell me in the comments, what do you think? Was this a cruel twist of fate or pure evil from the mother-in-law? I'd love to hear your thoughts. The year was 1841. Hartford was a quiet, modest town where life seemed predictable. Families worked hard, traditions ran deep, and the community looked after one another. But beneath this calm surface, people carried grudges, secrets, and jealousies that could erupt in the most unexpected ways. On one bright morning in June, the little church in town was alive with celebration. The bells rang loud, echoing through the cobbled streets. Children ran about, women wore their best dresses, and men polished their boots until they gleamed. A wedding was always a reason for festivity. But this wedding, this union, would be remembered for reasons far darker than joy. The bride's name was Margaret, or Maggie as everyone lovingly called her. She was only 20, gentle in spirit, known for her kindness and quiet strength. Her neighbors adored her. Some said her smile alone could light up the room. She grew up helping her widowed mother, sewing dresses for neighbors, and taking care of children. In short, Maggie was the sort of woman people described as too good for this world. The groom was a well-regarded young man in Hartford, educated and charming. To the community, he seemed like the perfect match for Maggie. On the surface, their union was a dream come true. But every dream has its shadows, and for Maggie, that shadow was her future mother-in-law. The groom's mother was a stern, controlling woman. Hardened by years of widowhood, she had learned to dominate her household. Her word was law, and her presence was sharp enough to silence a room. While others respected her strength, few loved her. From the moment she heard of Maggie, she was displeased. She did not want another woman to take her place in her son's life, to share his affection or influence. She saw Maggie not as a daughter-in-law, but as an invader, someone who would steal away the authority she had long guarded. Her disapproval was quiet but intense. She said little, but her eyes, cold, sharp, unwavering, revealed the storm brewing inside her. Inside the little church, Maggie stood radiant in her white dress, clutching a small bouquet. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes shone with hope. As she walked down the aisle, people whispered about how beautiful she looked, how perfectly matched she and her groom were. The vows were exchanged, rings slipped onto trembling fingers, and cheers filled the air. The congregation clapped, the bells rang once more, and the couple was declared husband and wife. But among the smiling faces, one woman sat unmoved, the groom's mother. Her lips were tight, her gaze fixed, and her hands folded in her lap like stone. Few noticed her then, but in hindsight, her silence would become a haunting memory. The celebration moved to a nearby hall. Long tables were laid out with roasted meats, pies, fruits, and bread. At the center stood a large punch bowl, filled with a sweet, fragrant drink. Guests laughed, toasted, and congratulated the new couple. Maggie, exhausted but overjoyed, sipped from her glass, raising it with a smile to thank everyone around her. What she did not know was that her first sip carried death. According to whispers that would later spread, the groom's mother herself had prepared the punch. She had added not only fruit and spice, but something far deadlier, a fine white powder. In the 19th century, poisons were terrifyingly common. Arsenic, belladonna, and other toxins could be bought easily in apothecaries, often without question. They were used to kill rats, to treat ailments, and, in some rare but chilling cases, to end lives. Maggie's glass was filled like all the others. She drank. At first, nothing seemed wrong. She laughed with her new husband, greeted relatives, and blushed at the compliments thrown her way. But within minutes, her color began to fade. She felt dizzy. Her chest tightened. A wave of nausea rose. Guests thought it was nerves. A long day, a young bride, surely it was just fatigue. But then her lips turned pale, her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed. The music stopped. The laughter froze. Screams broke the air. Maggie lay on the floor gasping, her white dress spread around her like broken wings. The doctor was called. Guests crowded in shock. And in the middle of it all sat the groom's mother, calm, composed, her eyes unreadable. The doctor examined Maggie quickly. Her pulse was faint, her breathing shallow. He looked up gravely. "This is no fainting spell," he said. "This is unnatural." His words sent ripples of fear through the hall. Guests began to whisper. Some glanced at the punch bowl, others at the stern figure of the mother-in-law. The rumors began almost immediately. Could it be food poisoning? No, the rest of us are fine. Then what? Why only her? One by one, their eyes drifted toward the mother-in-law. Witnesses later recalled how the groom's mother did not rush to her son's side, did not cry out for help, did not even appear surprised. Instead, she sat with her hands folded, watching. Some swore there was even the faintest trace of satisfaction in her eyes, though none dared say it aloud at the time. Her son was distraught, kneeling by Maggie, calling her name, begging her to hold on. But his mother remained motionless, her expression cold. Within hours, news of the tragedy spread through Hartford. By evening, people were already whispering in taverns and parlors. Some claimed it was an accident. Others spoke of poison. And a few, braver than the rest, hinted at the unthinkable, that the groom's mother herself had orchestrated it. The case became the subject of endless speculation. In a town as small as Hartford, secrets could not be kept. People remembered past quarrels, sharp words, and strange looks. They pieced together fragments of gossip into a story of malice and murder. The doctor, suspicious of poison, urged an inquiry. The punch bowl was examined. Some claimed the liquid had a bitter aftertaste, though others swore it tasted normal. In those days, scientific testing was primitive, but enough suspicion lingered to turn the community against the mother-in-law. Neighbors recalled how she had openly disapproved of Maggie, how she had warned others that Maggie was too soft, too simple for her son, how she often spoke of her fear of losing control of her household. Each memory became evidence, each rumor became fuel. Meanwhile, Maggie hovered between life and death. For hours, she drifted in and out of consciousness. She clutched her husband's hand, her face pale, her breathing ragged. Every moment felt like her last. The doctor administered what little remedies he had: herbs, water, rest. But against poison, his tools were limited. Through the night, Maggie's cries echoed. Her husband refused to leave her side. But outside the room, whispers grew louder. Would she survive? And if she did not, what justice could be sought? Days passed. Maggie's condition worsened. Her body weakened. Her once bright eyes dimmed. Some said she tried to speak, to whisper the truth of what happened, but her words were too faint to hear. The mother-in-law remained strangely distant. She neither comforted her son nor offered aid to Maggie. Instead, she kept to herself, silent, stern, unyielding. To many, her behavior was as damning as any confession. Finally, on the fourth night after the wedding, Maggie's heart gave out. Surrounded by weeping relatives, she took her last breath. She had been a bride for only 4 days. The town was stunned. A joyous wedding had turned into a funeral. The white dress of celebration was replaced by the black veil of mourning. Though no court case was formally recorded, the whispers never ceased. For years afterward, people in Hartford told the story of the poisoned bride. Some believed it wholeheartedly, convinced that the mother-in-law had committed the ultimate crime. Others argued it was nothing but rumor, a tragedy twisted into legend. But one detail kept the story alive: the eerie composure of the mother-in-law on the day of the poisoning, her lack of grief, her cold detachment. It was something no one could forget. The tale of Maggie's wedding became more than just a tragedy. It became a cautionary tale whispered to young brides. Beware of envy. Beware of malice hidden behind family walls. For Hartford, it was a wound that never healed. Never. For Maggie's husband, it was a sorrow that followed him for life. And for the mother-in-law, it was a shadow she could never escape. To this day, the story is remembered as one of the darkest chapters in Hartford's history, a day that began with joy and ended with suspicion, poison, and death. Before we dive into today's chilling story, I need you to do one thing. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on the bell, because what you're about to hear is not just another tale. It is a real tragedy that shook an entire town. And after listening, I want you to scroll down and leave me a comment. Do you think this was fate or pure evil? Your thoughts matter, and I'll be reading every single one. The day after the wedding should have been filled with joy, laughter, and the planning of a new life together. Instead, Hartford awoke to whispers carried through the narrow streets. The bride is sick, gravely sick, poisoned, they say. The tragedy spread like wildfire. In a town as small as Hartford, news traveled faster than truth. Every corner shop, every tavern, every church pew was filled with murmurs about what had happened in the grand wedding hall. Some pitied the young bride, fighting for her life after what should have been her happiest day. Others pitied the groom, torn between love for his new wife and loyalty to his mother. But most of all, suspicion swirled like smoke around one figure, the mother-in-law. The town doctor, a man named Dr. Hensley, had seen illness, fever, and accident. But this case troubled him. He described Maggie's symptoms in hushed tones: violent stomach pains, dizziness, fainting, blue lips. To him it looked like poisoning, but he had no proof. In 1841, forensic science was in its infancy. There were no advanced chemical tests, no microscopes powerful enough to identify arsenic with certainty. A doctor had only his eyes, his experience, and his instincts. And Dr. Hensley's instincts told him something terrible had been done to the bride. When he whispered this suspicion to the family, chaos erupted. Some relatives gasped in disbelief. Others exchanged knowing glances. One woman even crossed herself and muttered, "God forgive her soul if it's true." Meanwhile, the groom was torn apart. He stayed at Maggie's bedside, clutching her trembling hand, begging her to hold on. His face was pale, his eyes red from sleeplessness. He wanted to believe his mother innocent. He wanted to believe the sickness was chance, a cruel accident. But each time he glanced toward her, sitting cold and silent in the corner, doubt gnawed at him. "Mother," he whispered one night, unable to contain himself. "Tell me you had nothing to do with this." She looked at him with that same icy calm. "Your wife is weak. Perhaps she was never meant for this life." Those words crushed him. Was it grief speaking, or confession? As Maggie's condition worsened, Hartford's people pieced together a story of suspicion. One neighbor recalled how the mother-in-law had often said Maggie was too plain, too simple for her son. Another swore she had once overheard an argument where the older woman warned her son that bringing a wife into the household would ruin everything. And then there was the punch bowl. Several guests claimed the taste was bitter, unusual. Some even insisted they saw the mother-in-law near it just before it was served. No one had proof, but in a town like Hartford, proof was often less powerful than rumor. Inside the house, the young bride fought for her life. She drifted in and out of consciousness. Sometimes she muttered incoherently. Sometimes she screamed from the pain tearing through her body. Her husband refused to leave her side, but the others noticed something strange. Maggie seemed most agitated when the mother-in-law entered the room. Her breathing quickened, her eyes filled with fear. Once she even tried to push herself up, whispering something no one could clearly hear. Some thought it was the word poison. The family grew more divided. Some defended the mother-in-law, insisting she was too proud to commit such a crime. Others became convinced she was guilty. After 4 days of agony, Maggie's body gave out. Surrounded by relatives and her grieving husband, she took her last breath. The church bells rang again, but this time they did not celebrate. They mourned. The same people who had clapped and cheered at her wedding now wept at her funeral. Her white gown had been replaced by a coffin lined with black. But even in death, Maggie was not granted peace. Her story had already become a storm, and the town demanded answers. Should there be an investigation? Could justice even be found? Some urged the authorities to act, but the law in 1841 was murky when it came to proving poison. Without clear evidence, no charges could stick. A wealthy, influential woman could not be condemned on whispers alone. Still, the gossip never ceased. In the marketplace, in the taverns, even in the pews of the church, people whispered, "She killed her. She killed her own son's bride." For the groom, life became unbearable. He carried both grief and suspicion. He could not look at his mother without remembering Maggie's last gasps. But he also could not bring himself to accuse her openly. To do so would mean destroying what family he had left. Some say he'd left Hartford soon after, unable to live in the shadow of his wife's death. Others claim he stayed but lived a broken life, haunted by the memory of Maggie and the silence of his mother. As for the mother-in-law, she never confessed. She never wept in public, never admitted guilt, never defended herself. She lived the rest of her days under the heavy shadow of suspicion, a pariah in her own town. Children whispered her name like a curse. Women avoided her at market. Men muttered insults behind her back. But she bore it all in silence, her face as cold as stone. Did her silence mean guilt? Or was it simply her pride, her refusal to bend under rumor? The truth, like Maggie's last breath, was lost to time. In the years that followed, Hartford kept the memory alive. Parents told their daughters the story of the poisoned bride as a warning. Not every family welcomes a new wife with love. Old men told it in taverns as a lesson about envy and control, and children whispered it at night, daring each other to walk past the house where the tragedy had happened. Tale grew, changing with each retelling. Some swore Maggie herself appeared as a ghost, dressed in white, searching for justice. Others insisted the mother-in-law's spirit still roamed, bitter and unrepentant. And so, more than a century later, one question remains. Was Maggie's death the result of cruel fate, an illness mistaken for poison? Or was it truly the work of her mother-in-law, a woman consumed by jealousy and control? No records remain, no evidence survives. Only the whispers of Hartford and the story that refuses to die. Stop scrolling for a second. This part of the story is where things take a darker turn, where whispers become accusations and tragedy turns into legend. If you've been following along, you know how shocking this tale already is. But part 3 will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about family, loyalty, and betrayal. So before we dive in, hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and most importantly, tell me in the comments, if you were the groom, would you stand by your mother or demand justice for your wife? I'll be waiting to read your answers. Maggie's death left Hartford reeling. The small town, once buzzing with the joy of her wedding, was now cloaked in unease. Every time the church bells rang, people remembered how they had tolled for celebration one day, and for mourning only a week later. Her funeral was packed. Men stood solemnly, hats in hand. Women wept openly, some clutching their daughters close. Children, sensing the gravity of the moment, whispered questions they didn't fully understand. The groom stood like a ghost, his face pale, his eyes hollow. He held no speeches, shed no tears in public. His grief was too deep for display. And beside him, like a shadow carved from stone, stood his mother. The people noticed. They always noticed. It began in hushed tones at the market, in taverns, and in the pews of the church. She did it. She poisoned her. Some argued it was madness to believe such a thing. What mother would destroy her son's happiness? They asked. But others shook their heads. You didn't see her face, one woman whispered. Not a single tear at the funeral. Not a single word of comfort. Bit by bit, a picture formed. Her silence, once seen as strength, now appeared as cruelty. Her composure, once respected, became evidence of guilt. In the days that followed, the groom lived torn in two. Every time he looked at his mother, memories of Maggie's collapse came rushing back. Every time he remembered his wife's last breath, he heard her faint whisper, "Poison." He wanted answers. He wanted truth. But asking meant tearing apart the only family he had left. One night, unable to sleep, he confronted his mother again. "Tell me," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "Tell me you had nothing to do with her death." His mother met his eyes without flinching. You are my son, my blood. Do not let the weak memory of a girl cloud your loyalty." Her words froze him. Was that denial? Or confession in disguise? Hartford split into camps. Some defended the mother-in-law, insisting she was too proud and too practical to meddle with poison. Others condemned her in whispers, believing she had sacrificed Maggie to preserve her power in the household. Arguments broke out in taverns. Families quarreled over dinner tables. The story of the poisoned bride became more than gossip. It became a mirror of people's own fears and loyalties. Children began to whisper about seeing Maggie's ghost wandering the road near the church, still dressed in her white gown, searching for justice. They dared each other to walk past the mother-in-law's house at night, claiming her windows glowed with an eerie light. For the older townsfolk, the story became a warning. Mothers told their daughters, "Marriage is not only about love, it is about the family you marry into." Fathers told their sons, "Choose a wife, but beware the wrath of a mother who cannot let go." The truth lay in the limitations of the time. In 1841, there was no reliable way to prove poisoning. The punch bowl had been emptied, the food consumed. Without direct evidence, the law could not act on rumor alone. Some suspected the groom himself suppressed an investigation, unable to bear the shame of accusing his own mother. Others believed the authorities were simply too weak, too afraid of accusing a wealthy and influential woman. And so the silence of the law became part of the legend. For years after Maggie's death, the mother-in-law lived in Hartford like an outcast. People crossed the street to avoid her. Merchants served her quickly, nervously, eager to see her gone. Children mocked her from afar, calling her the poisoner. Yet she never faltered. She walked with her head held high, her face a mask of cold defiance. Some believed her silence was pride, proof that she was guilty but unrepentant. Others insisted it was dignity, a refusal to bow to gossip. Either way, her name became forever tied to the tragedy. As for the groom, his life unraveled. Some stories say he left Hartford unable to live in the shadow of suspicion. He was seen years later in another town alone, carrying the sorrow of Maggie's death like a permanent wound. Other accounts claim he stayed but never remarried. He lived quietly, a man haunted by the ghost of his young bride and the cold presence of his mother. Whichever version is true, his life was marked by tragedy. As decades passed, Maggie's story became part of Hartford's folklore. Old men told it in taverns, embellishing the details. Women whispered it to their daughters as a warning. Children repeated it as a ghost story by candlelight. The wedding that should have been forgotten as one of many in Hartford's history instead became immortalized as the tragic wedding. Even after the mother-in-law died, the rumors followed her. At her funeral, the church was half empty. Some refused to attend, saying they would not honor a woman who had destroyed an innocent life. More than a century later, the story still lingers. Was Maggie's death truly caused by poison, or was it simply a cruel twist of fate, an illness misinterpreted by a grieving community? The lack of evidence means the truth will never be known, but perhaps that is why the tale endures. Facts fade, stories remain, and in Hartford, the story of the poisoned bride remains one of the darkest, most haunting tales of its past.